Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Africa News with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, a splinter cell of the Islamic State group threatens to execute a Frenchman kidnapped in Algeria within 24 hours if Paris doesn't stop its participation in airstrikes on the militants in Iraq. Also, as the Ebola death toll rises to above 2,800, Nigeria and Senegal are given a cautiously optimistic assessment as the WHO says outbreaks there are contained. In Sierra Leone, meanwhile, it's one of the worst hit by the epidemic, and hundreds of thousands of people are emerging from a 3-day curfew. And dozens of South Africans are amongst the 115 people who died in the collapse of a church building in Lagos earlier this month. Pretoria is calling for a thorough investigation into what happened. First up, an Al-Qaeda offshoot threatened to execute a Frenchman who was kidnapped whilst hiking in Algeria on Sunday. The militants are demanding that France end its participation in airstrikes against Islamic State fighters in Iraq. The captives appeared in an online video saying he's been taken by a splinter group called the Caliphate Soldiers. He appears alongside 2 armed and masked men, saying he's been instructed to ask French President François Hollande not to intervene in Iraq.
The kidnapping took place in the region of Tizi Ouzou in northern Algeria. The victim has been identified as Hervé Gaudel, a 55-year-old photographer. On Sunday, the Frenchman came under attack by armed men while hiking in the Jojora National Park with other tourists. Algerian troops came to the scene, but he had already disappeared. He was the only member of the group to be taken away. In a video posted online, which France 24 has decided not to air, a group which called itself the Soldiers of the Caliphate and an affiliate of the Islamic State organization claimed responsibility. The footage showed the victim, seated between armed and hooded men, calling on the French president to stop the ongoing military action in Iraq. The video message opened with pictures of Islamic State leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. The kidnappers threatened to kill the hostage within 24 hours if French airstrikes in Iraq are not halted.
In other news, the people of Sierra Leone are once again out and about after spending 3 days at home as part of a national Ebola shutdown. Along with Liberia and Guinea, Sierra Leone's been worst hit by the West African epidemic that's claimed over 2,800 lives. Senegal's also seen 1 case and Nigeria 20. But the World Health Organization's been cautiously optimistic and says it looks like those outbreaks are pretty much contained. Back in Sierra Leone, around 1 million households were reached by 30,000 volunteers who went door to door, handing out soap, information on how the deadly disease is spread, and looking for unidentified cases. Well, Nika Alexander from the WHO joins me now from Freetown. Nika, so dozens of Ebola victims and new cases were identified, but that wasn't the aim of the campaign. Why would that not be the focus?
I think because if the campaign had been pitched or sold as a door-to-door case search, you really would have missed the opportunity to spread really vital information. As it was, in fact, people were still concerned and were wondering if that's what it was going to be before it started. So I think that's why it wasn't a door-to-door case search. What's more useful for people is to have the information on what the symptoms of Ebola are, what process they need to go through if there's somebody who's sick. And in fact, people were willing to let the community team know if there were sick people in their home, and some homes, dead bodies were discovered as well. So I think even though the aim of the campaign was not to identify more cases, authorities knew this might happen, they prepared for it, but more importantly, the information was spread as well.
So tens of thousands of volunteers headed out on this pretty sensitive task. So how do you go about finding enough trained staff to work on this and on other fronts in the battle against Ebola?
So for this, you train the staff. They identified the local healthcare workers, youth representative, and teachers as well. Teachers aren't working right now because schools are closed, yet they have a very prominent and respected position in communities. So they were parts of the teams that went door to door. And then UNICEF and WHO trained the trainers who then trained those people. So there was a real cascading of the training that happened ahead of time. In terms of the other types of people you need, the doctors, the nurses, the cleaners, the burial teams, that's a real challenge to train enough people to do those jobs. And in fact, not enough people are available right now.
So dozens of bodies were also discovered, but you were expecting that?
Not that so much expecting it, but planning for it. Authorities knew this might happen. It makes sense. And so they prepared extra spaces in treatment facilities. But even so, there weren't enough spaces available. It's not that the government miscalculated. It's that you just can't get enough online in time.
Thanks very much. Nika Alexander there for us in Freetown. Well, South Africa says that 84 of its nationals were amongst at least 115 victims of a collapsed church complex in Lagos that belonged to televangelist TB Joshua. Well, Pretoria has been scathing of the popular preacher and demanded that the Nigerian government do more to investigate why the religious guest house collapsed.
South Africa described it as the biggest evacuation effort by its air force since the dawn of democracy 2 decades ago. A medical team of 19 people took care of the injured on board the military aircraft. The 25 survivors were taken to the Steve Biko Academic Hospital in Pretoria. South Africa urged the Nigerian government to launch an investigation into the tragedy.
We have identified all South Africans who were involved in this tragedy, 84 deceased, 26 injured, and they've all been brought back except the one who decided to remain.
Back in Lagos, there's a new controversy. The journalist Nicholas Ibekwe claims the popular preacher TB Joshua, whose building collapsed, bribed reporters. He told us how.
He explained that he has kept 50,000 naira each for reporters who were supposed to go there and put out positive things for him and talk about the survivors and not about the dead.
South Africa's largest opposition party, the Democratic Alliance, wants the government to sue Joshua's organisation over the deaths. But analysts say Nigeria's megachurch leaders like Joshua are so influential that few politicians dare upset them.
Well, today, Kenyan media reported panic at a mall in the capital after shots were fired by guards spooked by a runaway car. Well, they, like many of their countrymen, are still jumpy because of the Westgate Mall siege launched by Somali Al-Shabaab gunmen last year. 12 months ago, the siege would have been entering its second day. Security forces have been widely criticised for their response to the crisis, as our Duncan Woodside reports.
Haji, a Kenyan Muslim, is one of the armed civilians who confronted Al-Shabaab inside Westgate, repeatedly entering the mall to evacuate fellow citizens in a context where the security forces' response was slow and poorly coordinated.
A lot of people would think that the response at that time was poor. Maybe there was a delay in terms of command structure. But us being the civilians, we were able to respond much faster because we were not taking orders from anybody.
Military and elite police units allegedly became embroiled in a sustained friendly fire incident in the building, allowing the militants, shown here, time to regroup. A police spokesman refers to this episode as speculative, but acknowledges that mistakes were made, resulting in a review of the country's disaster management policy.
The aim of reviewing that policy is also to look at overlaps and also maybe to look at duplicity of functions.
The new policy has yet to be unveiled. Kenya's security forces have been widely accused of indiscriminately cracking down on ethnic Somalis. Resentment is rife in Eastleigh, a Nairobi suburb with a large Somali community.
When the police come, there is no difference between a Kenyan Somali and a Somali Somali. All of us are treated the same. The only thing that helps is if you have money.
Islamic extremism is clearly on the rise in Kenya, stoked in part by a 3-year military occupation of southern Somalia. But while an opposition coalition is calling for a withdrawal of Kenyan troops, the government maintains that it will keep boots on the ground across the border to fight Al-Shabaab.
Well, finally, we head to Gabon, where a once promising multi-million-euro museum devoted to Bantu culture has fallen into disrepair because of a lack of funding and interest. Kate Moody tells us more.
2 giant elephant tusks proudly guard the entrance of the International Center of Bantu Civilizations, or CICIBA. It's an all-too-apt metaphor for the dilapidated museum, which has become one of the continent's white elephants, a project or possession unwanted by its owner and costly to maintain, but difficult to dispose of. Inside, the cultural treasures have been left to dust and disrepair. The museum was founded in 1983 by 11 countries, at the initiative of then Gabonese President Omar Bongo Ondimba. The idea was to preserve and shed light on the Bantu culture shared by some 600 tribes from Nigeria and Cameroon to South Africa.
The Bantu culture isn't about material things. It's about the language, the dance, the art, our way of moving.
But over the years, money dried up and enthusiasm waned as financial problems and civil conflict racked many of the Sisiba member countries. The Gabonese government has shelled out over 15 million euros to build the centre, which houses sound archives, manuscripts, masks, and artwork. Most are stashed away in boxes, inaccessible to researchers and the public. UNESCO estimates just 10% of Sisiba's potential has been achieved.
We cannot say that the centre hasn't met its goals, but we need to rethink our strategy to reboost Sisiba.
The museum directors still hope to get more financing to bring the centre back to life and launch new projects, like a system that can help visitors research their roots based on the name of a village.
That wraps up African news for now, but stay with us. More news and headlines from around the world coming up.
Our global effort is making strides, and with third quarter projections, we'll
blah blah blah. I just want to check into my hotel. I hope I get a king-size bed. I hope I can get a drink.
Get a massage.
Watch a funny movie.
Or go for a swim.
Snacks.
Scented candles.
Zombie movie. Minibar. Don't just hope. Know what you're really booking when you book. AccorHotels.com.